Hi, this is Andy Hoffman of CryptoGoldCentral.com, the sound money blog of the 21st century, in which I write daily of my vision of the future of money, in which Bitcoin is the center of the universe. Try my free 7-day trial membership and contact me at ahoffman@CryptoGoldCentral.com to arrange cryptocurrency or precious metal related consultations. This week, we have a guest who, like myself, does not pull any punches when it comes to spreading the truth of cryptocurrency, particularly regarding anything or person that threatens the Bitcoin community. And why wouldn't he, given that his avatar is Chewbacca, a global icon of strength and loyalty for the past 40 years? That man is JW Weatherman, who can be found on Twitter at @WeathermanIam and at his jwweatherman.com and btcthreats.com websites. To that end, welcome JW to One on One.
Thanks, man. That was the best introduction I've ever got and probably ever will get.
Anything related to Star Wars makes me happy. Okay, so let's get the show started, as we have a lot of timely and exciting topics to discuss, nearly all of which have played a part in the highly volatile aftermath of the December-January crypto explosion and subsequent February-March crash. To start, we're going all the way back to 2 weeks ago, when Bitcoin's second foray into the high 11,000s in 3 weeks was foiled by a confluence of news items that knowledgeable Bitcoiners understand to be mere noise, but the highly jittery trading community, fresh off of massive losses from the previous 2 months, continues to treat as shocking, incrementally negative developments. The first, of course, is the ongoing saga of the Mt. Gox trustee, otherwise known as the bear whale, who unquestionably played a major role in Bitcoin's decline from its peak of nearly $20,000, having sold 35,000 Bitcoins starting the day it peaked in late December until the day it bottomed in early January. 2 weeks ago, as Bitcoin was on the verge of taking 12,000 out, news of his exploits emerged, including the 140,000 Bitcoin he still holds in escrow, coincidentally as borderline fake news was published regarding potential US and Japanese governmental crackdowns on non-compliant crypto exchanges. With that background, JW, tell us your view of the causes of the crypto crash of the past 3 months, including how much import you put into the Mt. Gox bear whale's actions.
Yeah, so I actually have no idea how much it impacted it. All I could do is say, I basically looked at how much normally was being traded and then looked at the amount that he sold. And to somebody that's not really a trader or an expert on trying to do like technical analysis, I don't even really buy it, but I don't have a lot of expertise in that space. It seemed like a significant percentage. I thought, well, maybe that was enough to spark a little bit of a scare. But my overall thing with all the price movements is that this is freaking chaos. Like there could be an announcement in another language that none of us have even heard about, right? Like there's so much barriers to the free flow of information, but those barriers don't prevent the free flow of information through the price, right? That's one of the brilliances of price and economics, is that that it's just so efficient at getting the data across. So I always assume that I don't know what the hell is going on with short-term price movements. And really, even if I did, even if I could say that last week it was caused by this or that, it wouldn't at all inform my investment sort of strategy, because I know Bitcoin works. I'm a technologist. I get that it's functional and solves a lot of problems. So if I'm going to invest in it, I'm going to invest in it on that basis and wait for it to solve those problems and wait for everybody else to realize that it solves those problems. So the near-term stuff doesn't even really interest me all that much, to be totally honest.
Right. Well, actually, there was a lot of good things you said there, starting with you said, I don't have any technical analysis expertise, so I can comment it. Well, you know what? Of course you can, because you don't need technical analysis expertise to understand fundamentals. And technical analysis doesn't work when the entire world is using the same techniques. More importantly, when you're in such a tiny market where there's so much unknown out there and there's so much change, it really doesn't matter. Because if you look at all of the technical analysis gurus out there and all they said, for the most part, they've been wrong. And mostly because we're in a bear market now, even though people don't want to believe that, but we've been in a bear market for several months. And in a bear market, people who tend to be bullish tend to be wrong in the technical analysis, and they tend to be more right in their technical analysis when we're in a bull market, and pretty much everything you say about things that are good works. And the same goes with news. As you said, there's no way of knowing on any given day if news that comes out matters, but it just kind of happens to be that when you're in a bear market, all news is interpreted badly, and when you're in a bull market, all news is interpreted well. And the fact that in Bitcoin's case, after all of this bear market action, the price is still 10 times higher than it was a year ago. And equally importantly, the 200-day moving average is 10 times higher than it was a year ago. There's really nothing to worry about. Now, next, I want to talk more about what happened this past weekend. I know, you're looking at a longer term perspective, as I am, but I just want people to understand some of the events out there. And actually, I've made it very clear about what I think about the bear whale. He was a major contributor to the decline, certainly at the bottom, because he sold the most at the very bottom. But again, the sector was ripe for a decline, and he certainly got the ball rolling. And everything about it wasn't his fault, but certainly the ultimate bottom at 6,000. There's no doubt that him selling 18,000 on the last day was the major cause.
Right.
So okay, so again, back to this past weekend, starting with the latest and by far most pathetic Bcash attack. So pathetic, I might add, that most Bitcoiners likely missed it. To wit, on Friday night, after Bitcoin finally put some distance above the $8,000 level, it was 8,500 or so, the entire world is asleep and commencing a weekend where they want to get some hard-earned rest. Suddenly at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Bitcoin plunges and Bcash jumps 10%. In other words, Roger Ver was at it again, only this time the BCH-BTC ratio barely rose. And by Sunday morning, the price of Bitcoin is down to 7,300. And of course, Bcash lost all of its ill-begotten gains because he started an avalanche of altcoin selling. But the bigger issue that occurred this weekend, and people need to understand, is that what really led it, well, he might have started, was when we found out that EOS, one of the big altcoins, started selling a huge amount of its Ethereum that received in an ICO crowdfunding last year. So given all of these situations out there, I want to, and the recovery that we're in now, I'd like JW to tell us his views of the headwinds and the tailwinds, if any, the altcoin sector is currently facing, from Bcash to Ethereum to the middle and bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, so I think what's happened is Bitcoin changed the world. It introduced a completely different paradigm where we can have a database that's secure. We never had that before. The obvious first application of that and most important application of that is creating a secure money. And I think Bitcoin has drawn a lot of attention into the space as a result of being able to do that. And a lot of that attention is from people that just don't understand the technology and are basically dumb money. And when you have an incredible amount of dumb money, I mean, I know this from experience in the startup world, wash into an area, you have an incredible amount of dumb companies, right? If you have dumb money that's willing to throw cash at people that have dumb ideas, you end up with a whole bunch of dumb companies that are funded to do things that technologists look at and they're just flabbergasted. And that's what all of these other things represent to me. EOS, Ripple, Ethereum, Litecoin, these things are so laughable from a technology standpoint that the only explanation for their existence is dumb money. And it does cause a lot of volatility for us over in Bitcoin. It's a huge distraction, and it certainly is affecting the price movement. But on the other hand, it really is a bullish signal to me that people are seeing it, right? If we didn't have a bunch of dumb money running into the space, then we wouldn't have any reason to believe that the word is getting out how important and special Bitcoin is.
Yeah, and the dumb money it's exactly the same thing that happened in, and I wrote about this weekend. Of course, one, you have the dot-com bubble where the internet came to be just like Bitcoin has now, and an incredible amount of dumb money rushed into the space to capitalize. Money grabs, pumping up schemes, and even some scams in there. The same thing happened when I was in the gold mining sector for many years. The price of gold and silver went up, and then a million, shady exploration companies came out, penny stocks and all kinds of promoters, the same kind of things. And all that dumb money made the most money early and then lost it all. while the price of gold, I mean, gold just sat there, just like the internet didn't go away in 2000. And of course, Bitcoin is completely and utterly unchanged by all this dumb money. The thing is, of course, a lot of the things that anything that the dumb money does that's by accident positive, Bitcoin is going to subsume, and the rest of it is just going to, create some publicity for the industry, some good, a lot of it bad, until eventually the cream rises to the top. And Bitcoin is already at the top. And, there will be some other winners out there, but for the most part, as you said, it's dumb money. Next, the litany of Bitcoin bullish developments, which frankly matter not in the big picture, as no institution, central bank, or government can even dent Bitcoin's adoption, much less stop it. That said, if we're going to be told that Bitcoin declined because the SEC and Japanese government may or may not regulate cryptocurrency exchanges, we can easily refute such nonsense with the following. Starting with the news that violently reversed the sector's decline Sunday night, i.e. the G20's pre-meeting communique that it had no interest in regulating cryptocurrency. This followed by Monday's news that Bank of Japan Governor Haruhiko Kuroda, as in the #1 guy in Japan, said cryptocurrency could be a plus for the financial system, whilst the U.S. Congress issued a report stating, quote, cryptocurrencies could outshine government fiat currency, no less as we learned that the newly appointed PBOC governor in China, Li Gang, as in newly appointed last week, a couple of years back, said he admired the fact that ordinary people have the freedom to participate in Bitcoin and that cryptocurrency was inspiring. Thus, we have supposedly bad news from the SEC and Japanese government about vague and uncertain attempts to regulate crypto, whilst Donald Trump announced a crazy attempt at sanctioning Venezuela by banning purchases of its state-run petro. On the other hand, we have global monetary leaders either ignoring Bitcoin altogether or in many cases outright praising it. To that end, JW, what's your view of these contrasting news items regarding government views of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, good, bad, or immaterial?
They seem to be insanely good. If anything, it freaks me out how positive everybody is about Bitcoin. The head of the CFTC knowing how to speak about Bitcoin intelligently, like I don't, that is so disorienting and shocking, while at the same time being bullish about it. So it's this weird thing where there's a lot of positivity from people that are going to be eliminated by the technology, right? It's like Chase Bank and those guys having positive things to say about Bitcoin. It's hard to know how to read that when you're endorsing the competition that is going to destroy you. I think some of it is just ignorance. They don't quite understand how far-reaching and how significant it is. But I'd also like to think that that it also peels back the layers of government, where it's not this one big monolithic experience of the U.S. government. It's a lot of competing interests. All interests are special interests, right? And the people that are maybe more bullish on it feel like it's in their best interest, either because they have kids that they don't want to starve, because Social Security and all of the corruption is just going to completely destroy the US dollar either way, or if it's because they actually have invested in Bitcoin, or they have relatives that are invested in Bitcoin, or one way or another, they know it's in their best interest. And I tend to think it's the latter. That's, I think, the most positive way to view it. But there's probably more ignorance in the mix than I give credit to also.
Well, there's plenty of ignorance in the mix. And again, I've been in the money game, gold and now crypto for more than 15 years. So you like to believe that everyone is stupid, but a lot of these people are not stupid. I mean, you don't get to positions of power in the monetary world if you're a complete idiot. I mean, a couple can by being schmoozers or nepotism, but for the most part, they get it. And they just are not allowed to say what they mean, or they're part of a system that hired them to say something. Now, in the case of you hit, when we talk about fiat currency, there is no game theory involved. Either you're part of the dollar-based system and you basically have to support it. I mean, yeah, you get some countries like China who are kind of competitors in a way, even though their currency is kind of fixed and their economy is not quite what ours is as far as freely traded. But for the most part, there's no real game theory. Either you're with the system or you're not. And that's why they've been so successful in attacking gold, because everyone is against gold and everyone is for the dollar being in charge. But when we talk about game theory last year and the whole scaling debate, It was a matter of everyone for their own self. I mean, Roger Ver's got his own goals. The Bitcoin community has their own goals. The mining community has their own goals. And the same thing goes with what we're seeing now. Because if you go to the G20 and you go around the table and you ask the people what they think of Bitcoin, aside from their personal views, their nations may have completely different views. I mean, you can be completely pro Bitcoin and still not being against the US dollar or against the US government. And so, like you talk about the CFTC head, I mean, he can't avoid the fact that his children are telling him, we don't care about dollars or CFTC futures. We care about cryptocurrency. Or the head of the Bank of Japan, when it's pretty obvious to the world that the Bank of Japan is probably buying Bitcoin and it may be the savior of their society. So it's just, it's amazing. And you talked about Chase, JP Morgan, first, Jamie Dimon tests the waters by saying it's a fraud. And when that doesn't work out, then he hires a trading desk, and Goldman buys Poloniex because they are in the business of making money, right?
Yeah. It really feels like we're kind of past that tipping point. And as a security person, I'm always, paranoid and expecting the worst to happen. It's kind of what I get paid to do, but it's hard not to be optimistic. Like you said, when Goldman Sachs buys an exchange, that's about the strongest indication that the incumbent is now behind the new thing. Maybe they're not as ignorant, and maybe they're just a little bit more virtuous than I would give them credit for, in the sense that they can see the system's not working. It's going to come to an end. We need to upgrade it. And even if some of the, cronies are not going to be able to benefit as much, it's dying anyway. Maybe China is going to get rid of US dollar, dominance either way. So yeah, it does kind of seem from the outside to look like we're over that hump, and people are realizing it's better to be with it than against it. But we'll see.
And right, and again, there's the game theory going on from these various sectors of the mainstream finance world, because again, you used to think in terms of, well, there's the powers that be. That's what we call them, and be like, yeah, the banks and the central banks and the governments, they all have the same goals. But now, just within that group, okay, you have banks like Goldman Sachs, you have governments, you have central banks, some of which are independent of governments and some are not, and corporations. And they don't all have the same goals. When it comes to these banks, everyone thinks that, like, well, like Goldman Sachs has all their guys in the government, so they're part of the government. No. Goldman Sachs uses the government when it works for them. They made all these profits and they lobbied to become big players in the government within a system that made them rich, the fiat dollar system. But now that they're starting to see that crypto is a competitor, they're starting out by hedging, first by saying nice things, then by getting into the business, and ultimately they will follow the tea leaves, and they may go all in crypto and say screw the government, or if they thought Bitcoin would fail, then they go right back to doing what they were doing. So again, there's way too much game theory for any single government to think that they can change it. And then when you look at the fact that the United States, there's so much anger at what they've done with the fiat currency system, and people also look around and go, and you only have 4% of the world's population. Why is it that you think you can control something that the Chinese can't control, that have like 30% of the population? It's the most remarkable thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, it is incredible. And I think all of this stuff matters for short-term price movements, but in the long term, none of it matters, because it doesn't matter if Goldman Sachs gets behind it or if they are ignorant enough to try to fight it. They're not going to be able to shut it down. The network is just simply too secure for even a well-funded government attack to be able to roll back history. So the game has been over. Really, I say that the game ended in maybe the early 90s when the United States government decided that they weren't going to try to prevent individual citizens from having access to cryptography anymore. Ever since then, this has just been slowly watching the system play out, and the inevitable consequence of that is that we will have a secure money that governments can't steal.
Well, I think I'm going to add a topic here based on, I didn't realize you did so much work in crypto security, because I always talk about now how I can't see how anything can go wrong. I didn't say that I'm guaranteeing Bitcoin will be $1 million or anything, But when you think about where we were even a year ago, where you worry about hard forks and can governments stop it if they ban it, all that stuff. And, I wrote some recently. I said it's the only asset class where nothing terrible can go wrong. What terrible can go wrong? I don't mean that it doesn't moon to $1 million quickly, but what do you think could go wrong? What could go wrong in Bitcoin?
Well, actually, answering that question is what got me really excited about Bitcoin. I've been in software security for a long time. And like most people that are working for big companies and getting paid pretty well, just doing normal sort of security work, Bitcoin, it just didn't, I don't know, it didn't click for me. I was so jaded about stuff like Linden dollars. And so when I heard about it, I was like, it's SETI at home again with Linden dollars, right? It just doesn't make sense. But really about 6 months ago, I had gotten curious enough to start digging in. And I couldn't find a way to break it. And I knew about the work that Dan Kaminsky had done years ago, and that he couldn't find a way to break it. But I just figured it was a stupid project for other reasons, economic, partly economic ignorance. But anyway, so that's what got me really engaged about 6 months ago, was doing a threat model. And what a threat model is a list of all the ways that you could try to break something, the things that should prevent it, and then the sort of the end result. How likely is this to happen? And it's a very systematic process. So if you go out to btcthreats.com, that's exactly what I created. I don't know, it's a 30-page document, 40-page document. And as I went through it and tried to find ways to break it, everything from governments banning it to centralized exchanges getting hacked, all those sort of things that have happened and probably will happen in the future, I couldn't find any way that it was actually going to matter much. So it doesn't mean I'm right. It just means that I've been very careful and systematic about it, and I don't see a way in which Bitcoin doesn't succeed. As a result, I've been pretty obsessed with it and focused on it for at least the last 6 months now.
Right. And the same goes for here. When you consider that so much, quote, bad has happened in the past year, and that the price is 10 times higher and the adoption is much higher, and SegWit is at 35%, and all these great things are happening. And more importantly, I wake up every morning knowing that there's going to be nothing bad. I mean, yeah, the price may be down, but from what you're talking about, it's the same thing. I don't wake up worrying anymore because I know the network is fine and the sentiment, comes and goes, but eventually the sentiment will be far more bullish than bearish, as it's been for the last few weeks. And we'll go back to the next run up and more importantly, the next advancement in global adoption. Now, on the topic of governments, I want to spend some time focusing specifically on Japan, where the aforementioned comments from BOJ Governor Kuroda square firmly with the actions of a nation clearly intent on capitalizing on Bitcoin like none other. Since last April, when its forward-thinking government declared Bitcoin legal tender, I've been under the assumption that it is actively acquiring Bitcoin. So much so that it may well have been the mystery buyer who bought 100,000 Bitcoin at the February lows, particularly in light of the fact that a major seller was the Mt. Gox bear whale, who inexplicably dumped large amounts at the market lows. JW, do you believe Japan aims to revive its legacy and pay off its gargantuan debts with Bitcoin riches? And if not, which nation or nations would you expect to pursue such strategies first?
Oh man, like I said before, I don't even think about these guys as nations, right? Like there'd be individual players in Japan that believe that they're going to benefit. I guess a lot of it is public choice theory, if somebody wants to look it up. So there's individual actors within the Japanese government that think they're going to benefit from either an announcement or an actual action, and I think that they're going to do that, right? So if, for example, when if the head of one of the big banks in Japan said, "Hey, we believe Bitcoin is the future. It's going to replace our national currency," I wouldn't immediately think, one, that he believes what he's saying, and two, that he's going to try to make that happen. My immediate thought would be, "Oh, he bought some Bitcoin last weekend and plans on selling it in 2 weeks," right? So when it comes to trying to figure out what a conglomeration of selfish actors is going to do, even if they put a nice big label on themselves, like I don't know, Microsoft or the United States, it's like it's a cacophony in my mind of how it's gonna play out. So I do think, though, that there is wisdom in the idea, and if there are government officials that do have a sort of altruistic motivation, and I'm sure some of them do to some degree. I think there is a lot of wisdom in recognizing that if you're getting in early on something like Bitcoin, you're going to the people in that region are going to be wealthier than if they don't. If Bitcoin works from a technology standpoint and replaces national currencies, $1 million of Bitcoin is very reasonable, if not conservative. If you look at the just the number of government dollars in circulation alone, you get into that order of magnitude. But then when you look at derivatives built on top of that, and all the things that I think are essentially Ponzi schemes and snake oil, that number jumps up considerably. And then when you think about the fact that most people in the US, for example, are required essentially to put their money into the hands of one monkey that puts it into the hands of another monkey, none of which know anything about the business model of Google or IBM, in which the money's actually being invested in. And they have to do that because otherwise they keep it in the US dollar and their value drops. That whole system of even publicly traded companies, which we're talking about really big money, will probably not exist, or certainly most of the motivation for that goes away in a world with a sound and secure money. So if you start talking about those numbers, this is a revolution of insane proportions. And if there's a government official out there that has even the slightest bit of decency, he should do everything he can to encourage, especially the poor people in his region and around the world, to benefit from this shift.
Right, and pardon me if I keep getting mesmerized by that beautiful beach scene with a rainbow and Chewbacca at the side. But it's amazing. It seems like every question that I bring up comes back to the same thing. It's that game theory thing again, which really doesn't exist in the fiat currency system because everyone is on the same side. There's no one in the fiat system who is for gold, and there's no one who's against the dollar. You're starting to see the chinks in the armor now because there's so much debt buildup and wealth inequality that you're starting to see, what happens in such a flawed system like trade wars and exploding debts and of course money printing. But the fact is, for a long time, everyone's on the same side. Here in Bitcoin, minute one, everyone is for themselves. Again, government individuals realize that there's a potential that they can become wealthier than the government itself if they and their families and friends get into Bitcoin. And of course, there are definitely at the same time government policies. They may be official and they may be unofficial, but like you said, there are people in government who realize, especially in a communist nation, for instance, like China, that you need to have a policy about what you want to get your people to invest in. I mean, the Chinese people, for years, the government told them you should buy gold because they thought it would make them wealthier. The problem is they didn't realize Bitcoin would come around. And so now they don't know what to do. The government's still buying Bitcoin. The people are no longer buying it because they're not allowed, but the rest of the world is. And in the case of Bitcoin, there's no doubt in my mind that there are nations that are formulating policies and buying. They just haven't talked about it yet. Japan is the perfect example because they've always been forward thinking when it comes to central banking. It doesn't mean they're always right, but forward thinking nonetheless. And the fact that they declared it legal tender and that they're, when China banned it and Korea might have banned it, all the exchanges went to Japan and they have all these retailers there, makes me believe that they may be one of the first to announce that it is an official policy. But make no mistake, someone will. And if they don't, there's, like you said, lots of people within the system that can hurt the fiat system and help Bitcoin simply by their own personal decisions. Now, we've discussed the crypto crash in general from both a Bitcoin and altcoin perspective and the events of the past few weeks, wild and woolly trading action. So let's look at the rest of the year and what we think might happen. In my view, the damage done to altcoins is significant, but to Bitcoin, immaterial. Thus, I believe we're in the final stages of consolidation before another big rally in which, when all is said and done, no one will be questioning which crypto is king. As for you, JW, what's your view of the most likely course of events over 2018's remainder regarding both crypto investment trends and Bitcoin's likely adoption and technological advancement?
Yeah, it's hard to say if I think this is going to happen all in 2018. I have been saying for a few months that I think 2018 is going to be the year where state actors and governments get into the game. I think we've all been waiting for institutional money and excited about that, but it does seem like things are really ramping up quickly, and I do think that it's going to be more and more obvious that that this just works a lot better than gold and a lot better than dollars to nation states, and they're going to act accordingly. Not just people that are trying to get around U.S. sanctions, although that's a huge motivation, but also people like the U.S. that are just recognizing that the dollar is not going to last forever, and they probably have a better idea on that expiration date than we do. I think a big part of what's going to drive that, though, is back to that game theory thing. The thing with gold is if you are, if you're a government official and you want to profit by being bullish on gold and make some announcement, you're not going to change the value of gold drastically, right? It's already such a big market cap, and there's already so many people in play, and there's not that much new information that the market is absorbing about gold.
And don't forget, there's a gigantic paper gold market that's even bigger than the physical market. So if the physical market is 7 trillion, the total market may be 20 trillion.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And there's two things that are different about Bitcoin. One is that you can't have a bunch of extra slop. You can't have that extra 13 trillion in the system, really, because it's so easy to verify that you actually have your Bitcoin. And that's why having cryptocurrency backed by any physical asset, it's just a huge security flaw, because you don't know that you actually have the asset. The brilliance of Bitcoin is that it's very easy to know that you absolutely have it. And the other thing that's a really big factor here that I think is going to cause government officials, and as a result, governments, to get into it, is that it can be bought anonymously. It's not easy, but it's a hell of a lot easier to get your hands on $1 million of Bitcoin anonymously than it is to get your hands on $1 million of gold anonymously. And you can also transport it. You can go across borders. So I think my hope is that we're going to see some really interesting moves. Maybe out of some third world country, a dictator can see that the jig is up, making a big move into Bitcoin, and then getting out of Dodge. Maybe the U.S. government gets more aggressive about it and starts being more vocal about actually actively investing in it. But I do kind of feel like 2018, we're going to see some really interesting stuff at the state level.
Right. And you basically, the most important thing of all the things you just said was people are going to realize it works better. It certainly works better than gold. It works better than people will come to realize it works better than dollars, especially when they realize it's deflationary, which versus the dollars and yen and euros, which have been boiling people in a pot of inflation like frogs or lobsters, that they don't even realize it. But yes, it works so much better in so many ways. And like you said, the comparisons with gold, it's a joke. I mean, to have any kind of amount of gold, when there was no Bitcoin, you say, yes, it's outside of the system. But the fact is, it's really, to do anything in gold, you have to do it inside the system, and it's, of course, unwieldy, and it's not particularly fungible or divisible. Storage, all these kind of things. It's not even very liquid, and except in very limited cases. And of course, everyone knows what fiat currency has done to the world as the debts of the world explode and the wealth inequality, et cetera. And you mentioned about, again, it comes down to what nations are going to make these decisions first. I think one that's been forced to make that decision has been Venezuela. It's the perfect poster child of a system where the fiat currency, not only did the fiat currency failed it, but even the big nations in the fiat currency system are against it, like the United States. And so they are being forced into trying something different. And it'll be very ironic if a country, well, like Bulgaria, which accidentally, backward nation, which accidentally got some, becomes rich, or if Venezuela is forced into it and becomes rich, or maybe if Japan, which has the biggest debt load in the world, becomes rich because they realized that it was their only chance at salvation. So yes, I agree completely. If you want to go on,
Yeah, I think the thing that people don't quite understand, and I definitely get this because of just having a real focus on software security for a long time. The reason that Bitcoin is special is that it's very hard to steal. Now, I know there's stories like that thing in Bulgaria where they had enough to pay off a big portion of their national debt, and then it was, quote, stolen. But the reality is nobody really owned that, right? There was no personal owner that had the private keys to that 300 billion or whatever the crazy number was that was, quote, stolen. But if you have your own private keys, then Bitcoin is the hardest money that we've ever had to steal. And you can't have it stolen through inflation. You can't have it stolen through, printing paper that represents gold that doesn't exist. And gold's easy to steal. US dollars are easy to steal. We've really never had anything that was hard to steal before. And Bitcoin is that thing. So that's why it works better. And that's why we're going to be seeing people adopt it. Specifically the time frame, I don't know. I mean, I've been around the internet and high tech long enough to see things that work, and still had to wait 10 years for the first decent touch screen on an Apple device. So things do sometimes take a lot longer than I expect. On the other hand, sometimes they happen really, really fast and completely blows me away. I can't believe the CEO of Twitter and Square is saying that Bitcoin is going to replace the US dollar. That is so disorientingly good. If we saw something like Twitter enable lightning payments to get rid of all of the spam that we're always constantly swimming in, that would be such a light bulb game changer. And none of the altcoins can play in that space. None of them are actually useful. So once we start seeing this sort of stuff happen, I think, the altcoins are going to fall away into the nonsense that they really are. And we're going to see just a crazy movement in Bitcoin.
I'm sorry, you're talking about Jack Dorsey? He said, just as they're banning all these cryptocurrency advertisements, which is not necessarily a negative, it's not something that means that they don't like Bitcoin.
Right.
But are you saying that he actually just said, I think Bitcoin will replace the dollar?
Yeah. I think it was the LA Times. I was flipping through it this morning. I believe that he said that to the LA Times, and yeah, it's Jack Dorsey. He's the CEO of Twitter and Square. So that it's just insane. I would have never expected a CEO, especially. I mean, this is what's amazing about Bitcoin is you have guys that are like liberal, right? You have guys that are maybe borderline communist in some of their thinking that just fall in love with Bitcoin and are by default, Rothbardian ANCAPs, right?
Right.
So he's coming out saying it replaces the US dollar. I doubt that he understands that results in the end of income taxation, right? Because it's just, you cannot effectively tax a nation state through income tax if they're on an untraceable digital currency. It's not even possible with paper dollars, right? Like if you have a shop on the side of the road and you're selling knickknacks for cash, the IRS knows you're not going to pay very much in income tax, right? So there's the sort of massive shifts that are going to occur throughout society as a result of this. I don't think people really grasp. And I think maybe that's why they're willing to say some of these extreme things that maybe don't sound as extreme to them. But if the CEO of Twitter had come out and said the US government is a fraud and it's all coming to an end in the next 10 years, that would not be as extreme as saying that Bitcoin's going to replace the US dollar. So I'm completely in awe.
So people should take notice when major tech CEOs are saying this. Again, to think that major tech CEOs are not well aware, because like those people think like, well, Bill Gates, he's so into the whole system and he's a socialist and all that stuff, or Jeff Bezos and he owns the Washington Post. But I mean, let's face it, these are the most brilliant tech minds that there are in the entire world. I assure you that Jeff Bezos and Jack Dorsey and all those guys and Eric Schmidt at Google know everything there is to know about Bitcoin. They are just trying to decide how they want to position their company and their legacy.
I gotta say I disagree on that.
Okay, go on.
These guys they're brilliant, but they're brilliant in their space. And I've worked with enough guys sort of at the inner circle of various companies to know that they can be pretty narrow in their knowledge. It's not necessarily very broad. I would be completely shocked if he had any idea that adopting Bitcoin means the end of the nation state. I don't think that he's connected those dots yet, but I could be wrong. Either way, I'm super excited that he's on board and he's a supporter, and he's helping bring about, a level of human freedom and productivity that will make all of this stuff look insignificant when we actually see what happens.
Right. Well, of course, you can be a strong believer in Bitcoin that it's going to do well without believing it will completely take over the world and eliminate nation states. It could simply coexist with them or make for a better system, a better monetary system. I mean, obviously, it's going to cause major changes in political and social regimes, but It doesn't mean it's going to overthrow the world and we'll have a brand new world. It may. And again, yes, there are a lot of these guys who are just focused on their area. A guy like Warren Buffett, for instance, I mean, he's so rich from stocks, he probably couldn't care less about Bitcoin. He couldn't possibly imagine getting richer or changing what he does. And Bill Gates may be so rich from what he's done and all the other things that he is doing that he doesn't even have the time for it. So I'm sure if they wanted to, they could. But like you said, they may not either they are narrow-minded or they have other things in their mind. But the fact is, when you start to see major tech titans talking this way, it's inevitable that the rest is going to follow at some point.
So I'll give you an example of why I think it's possible that he doesn't know what's going on. I just did an interview with Chris Beams, who's working on the BISC decentralized exchange. And he got involved in Bitcoin and was interested in Bitcoin for quite a long time before he even realized. And he's one of the few people that I know that really understands the history of the cypherpunk movement and has an interest in it and knows that it came out of Austrian economics and the writings of Murray Rothbard that inspired Tim May and that whole group of guys hanging out in San Francisco that embarked on a 30-year project that resulted in Bitcoin, right? So he's pretty well connected. And even he, I think, only started getting interested in Austrian economics and, Murray Rothbard after he was in Bitcoin for some period of time. So I do think that that if Bitcoin's successful, the nation state can exist. I don't think those two things are compatible. And I do think that most people that are in Bitcoin don't really quite know that or haven't quite connected those dots. Even within a pretty small group, not a lot of Bitcoiners. I'd say maybe, I don't know, 30%, which is a huge number proportionally, but compared to the rest of the population, but maybe 30% of Bitcoiners at most would even consider themselves ANCAPs. So there's some pretty interesting dynamics at play, but I do think that's the brilliance of the cypherpunk movement, is that somebody like Jack Dorsey, that probably is not an ANCAP, is now endorsing exactly the thing that we need, which is a secure money to bring about a lot more economic and individual freedom.
And everyone has their own angles. Everyone has their own goals, including myself. I mean, myself, obviously, I want to become wealthy. I want to help people become wealthy. And given especially my background in watching the fiat currency and what it's done, I'm interested in watching it be, quote, overthrown, even though that's a very dramatic way of putting it. I just like to see the current system, which has done so much damage, replaced by something that's better, even if it takes a very long time. But even me, the way I look at it, I don't even think in terms of Bitcoin is going to replace the nation state. Well, at the same time, I write articles saying Bitcoin will cause governments to shrink because they won't be able to collect taxes. It's just that simple. And if governments shrink, well, then the USA as we know it is not the same USA. They can't afford the big government. They can't afford the big military. And they can't afford to do, quote, whatever it takes to keep the dollar as the monetary standard. So yeah, from a big picture perspective, even people like me, it's even a bit beyond me what the real impact can be. And like we were talking before, it could happen very fast. It could also take a very long time.
Yep, totally. And I just to clarify, I don't think that we're going to end up in a world where we don't have functional security. The roles that we think of as being performed by the military or the police. And I don't think we'll end up in a world where we don't have a functional justice system. I actually think that what's going to happen is we're going to have an improved personal defense system and an improved justice system. But it's going to be very different than what we have now. And even trying to imagine, like you said, a nation state that's not based on taxation is definitely, it takes some creativity to see what the world's going to be like.
Right. I mean, when we talk about Bitcoin, we don't even talk about the Bitcoin revolution. It's really the decentralization revolution. And it's not just of money. It's people realizing as a whole that the world does not operate efficiently when it's allowed to be top heavy, especially when those people at the top are the people who get to make the decisions and print the money. And when the system that's focused on Bitcoin, and let's call it cryptocurrency in general, is foisted upon them because people start adopting it, they simply just don't have the power anymore. So people are forced to be more accountable on a personal basis and more efficient in groups. And so I agree completely that of course we're going to have defense and justice and civil liberties, but they're going to be administered in a more efficient way. And of course, that takes a lot of time to occur. But everything happens in Bitcoin in double dog years. So it would not surprise me if we look up at the turn of this decade and we don't recognize the world for what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely believe that we'll look back on Bitcoin as for history, the internet will seem insignificant. The internet will just be that precursor moment before the creation of Bitcoin.
Right. Well, I've said that the two biggest inventions of our lifetime are the internet and Bitcoin, and people assume that the internet is the more important one because, of course, you need the internet for Bitcoin. But the fact is, will one have a bigger impact on the world than the other? We will see if one does, and that one might be Bitcoin. Now, I have two more topics. The first of which they're a little lighter. This is very deep. Okay, it's something that I certainly have spent a lot of time weighing in on Twitter, which is crypto dividends. Specifically, the recent fork of let me just be nice, of Be Private, okay? And the upcoming launch of the first airdropped altcoin, Be Rhodium, which I have much higher hopes for. Now, JW, tell us your views on these two crypto dividends, since they're front and center, and one is a very strange fork, and the other is an airdrop. And generally speaking, what is the outlook for crypto dividends in this weakish altcoin environment?
So I'll precursor this with, I see Bitcoin as a mission to create secure money. It's an open source project. So it's not just a chunk of code. It's not a repository. It's not a group of developers. It's a goal. Just like MySQL was a goal to create a good database. So in as much as any of these other projects were actually assisting and participating in the open source project that is creating a secure money, I'd be all for it. The reality, though, is that none of them are. None of them are working on doing anything that's useful and functional and helpful. And then that knowledge is getting brought back into the Bitcoin project. All of these projects are, on the contrary, taking stuff that's either not ready, like in the case of Ethereum and other projects, we'll say Monero, Zcash, right? They're taking things that aren't ready, that have been developed by the smart guys in Bitcoin, and then marketing them. And so to me, that's just a fraud and it's a scam because it doesn't, the technology doesn't work, but they're raising money, giving people the impression that it does.
Right. And you're talking about the platform concept, which Bitcoin is starting to implement on a slow scale, or privacy, which Monero or Be Private are saying that they are going to do better.
Yeah, they're taking stuff like work that's been done by Bitcoin developers like Greg Maxwell, bundling that up into a piece of code that would never ship on Bitcoin, and then offering it to the public as an investment opportunity. That is a fraud. It's a scam. And if we did have a functional justice system, all these guys would be making restitution payments right now. So I have no respect for any of that stuff. It is definitely just taking advantage of the technical ignorance or the economic ignorance. And I don't say ignorance to be insulting. It's just that I've spent decades working in software security and, half a decade obsessed with economics. So it's hard fought to get this knowledge that I can say that I have that lets me look at these things as absolute cons. But at the end of the day, I can say that because I've bled enough to be able to understand what's happening here. With something with the crypto dividends, right? So something like Bitcoin Cash, that's a different category to some degree, because what they're doing is they're kind of taking advantage of economic ignorance. They're making claims that they're better in some way, but a lot of it is just you better be diversified. You don't know what's going to happen. Just hold on to it, right? That's their major.
They are taking Bitcoin's code and, as you say, marketing it in a different way for profit. And there's no doubt that in Bcash, the insiders have massively profited personally from this marketing scheme.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they're no less frauds. It's just it's a slightly different angle on the fraud. It's more focused on, you already have it, don't sell it, let us pump and dump it, and less focused on, you should buy it because it works better, right? So it's just marketing jargon. At the end of the day, they're still selling absolute worthless crap to people that don't know better. So that's my summary of that whole sort of space from a technology standpoint. From a personal standpoint, I really care about having the world have access to a secure money. And that is the goal of Bitcoin. It's the mission, and it's something that I want to participate and support. So all of these things are just attacks on that, right? It's the worst kind of fraud because it doesn't just steal money from the ignorant. It also slows the adoption of a secure money. So all the gold bugs and everybody that understands Austrian economics, they know that there's kids in Africa right now that are starving to death because of stupid trade embargoes and inflated dollars. And Bitcoin is the only invention that we've seen in the history of humanity, right? In all of recorded history that could possibly solve that problem. And these bastards are taking that as an opportunity to steal from people and slow the adoption of Bitcoin. Like that is the most darkest heart of evil sort of move that I think that you could make. So yeah, from all angles, I'm fully disgusted by guys like Vitalik and Charlie Lee that will take advantage of this moment in time to profit personally.
Funny that you should say that about Charlie Lee, because he actually did it a long time with benevolent intentions, and he's never tried to harm Bitcoin as opposed to just about everyone else.
Well, let me tell you why I put him in that category, because that's probably the least popular thing that I say, because he's a very popular person in this.
Doesn't bother me. I mean, I don't consider him a con man. Absolutely, he's been in fact, he's a major reason why we have SegWit. So I have nothing bad to say about him. It's just funny to think of him in the same light as someone as, well, you didn't say Roger Ver, but other.
No, absolutely. I put him in that same category. And the reason that I put him in the same category with Roger Ver is that that having worked in security, I've worked with a lot of cons and frauds over my career. And the one thing that you cannot do with a con man is pay any attention to what he says, right? You have to follow the flow of the money, because the only reason that a con man that's operating at that level is able to get there is that they are masters at human manipulation. They are the best of the best of the best at creating narratives and creating impressions and ideas in your head that you think were your idea. That's what they do. So if you talk to anybody that's been in law enforcement and has dealt with people like this, you walk out of the room after having interviewed these people liking them. And you have to go back and look at the records of the police reports of what they did in order to reset your own brain into even understanding that they're possibly bad guys. That's what these guys do. So when I talk about Charlie Lee, I talk about him in a negative light because he did exactly, if you just look at the facts and you take the personality out of it, he took a false narrative, which was Bitcoin can't scale. He took a false economic theory, which is we need a silver to Bitcoin's gold. He used that to create a coin that is a fork of Bitcoin, that just like Bcash. He made an arbitrary change to the code that provided no value, right? He changed the block time or something.
And he quadrupled the size, the supply.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you tell me the difference between that and what Roger Ver did, just as far as actions go, and then I will reconsider my position. But if you just tell me he's a nice guy and you enjoy talking to him, I'm going to say, yeah, Roger Ver just has a different target market. It doesn't mean he's any less evil.
Right. Well, it's just funny. I mean, I'm pursuing this because I'm not, and again, I'm not saying I disagree with you. I'm just thinking of it in terms of Charlie Lee, who'd be considered the ultimate friendly fork guy, against Roger Ver, who's the ultimate contentious fork guy. Of course, when Charlie Lee did it, there was no such thing as a contentious fork. People didn't even know what Bitcoin was back then to know what a fork was or what he was doing. My view.
Well, I mean, I've gone back and I've looked at it because I do get more pushback on this than anything. Way back then, he was creating this false narrative of we need a silver to Bitcoin's gold. And way back then, guys that were working on this problem before 2008, which, by the way, that's a really good heuristic to use when you're trying to figure out who you can trust and who you can't. Look at guys that were working on this problem before there was money in it. Those guys were saying, no, we do not need silver to Bitcoin's gold. And even with the SegWit narrative, Charlie enabled SegWit, so we should love him. You look at guys that were working on this problem back then, they're all saying, no, we didn't need that. We don't need Litecoin. Litecoin is not Bitcoin's testnet. Testnet is Bitcoin's testnet. We don't need little old ladies to buy into something that is totally worthless in order to be able to test a piece of encryption. It's not required.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we can go on and on about this topic. It's just funny because if you ask me, one of the people most responsible for Bitcoin winning the scaling debate was Charlie Lee by pushing SegWit through, which really, I think got the avalanche rolling for SegWit for Bitcoin. But that has nothing to do with whether Litecoin is useful or not. It just means that his actions actually help Bitcoin whereas Roger Vere's have in every way harmed it. And
it's a brilliant narrative. I don't buy it, but it's a really, really good piece of marketing.
Well, look, I sold all my Litecoin last summer when as soon as basically SegWit was getting adopted, when I realized there's absolutely no reason why Litecoin could ever outperform Bitcoin over time. But it wasn't because I disliked him. I just realized Litecoin has no advantage over Bitcoin in the slightest. And that's why anyone who asks me, I say, yeah, it's cheaper. I get it, the whole thing, but it's not better. And it's not worth owning to me.
So here's my last thought on the topic. We should do a whole show on it. But ask yourself, who did more to create the narrative that Bitcoin can't scale than anybody else? Who created the idea that we need to have another digital asset because this open source project is not going to get us there? Who did it the earliest and the most effectively and set the table for every other fraud that came out?
That is certainly one way of looking at it. I mean, most of the people now don't realize it. Like you're saying, you have to be like a George Washington type historian, but you're absolutely right. I mean, that's where it started. As for the current crypto dividends, again, it's the same kind of thing. Just about all of them, if not all, I wouldn't say all, but just about all of them are pure money grabs. Some actually have altruistic, I shouldn't say altruistic. Some actually believe that they're creating some value, which 99% of the time will be subsumed by Bitcoin if it's worth anything. But again, from a financial perspective, I just look at everything and see, what do I think will go up? I just tell people, look, if you're getting it for free, it's a lot different than buying it. That's why I don't recommend that people are buying things. But I do recommend that people look into everything and just consider it. That's all. And 99% of the time, you're just going to say, I'm going to sell it for Bitcoin. But it is definitely something, a topic that, yes, we can have whole shows about. And there's a reason why that you and I are Bitcoin maximalists at the core, because not only is it good for society, but it's good for Bitcoin. It's good for our personal investments if the altcoins don't do well.
But look at something like Rhodium, right? Like there is zero chance that Rhodium is doing anything useful. There is zero chance that it's going to result in anything coming back into Bitcoin. As a result of that, I would say anybody that's promoting it is either accidentally or intentionally promoting a fraud, because a person that has technological competence, right, that has been working in software security, that has any idea what's going on, they're either on the take or they don't know what they're doing, because there's no there to anybody that's competent.
Right. Well, Rhodium is simply trying to be an investment. It's not trying to be Bitcoin at all. It's trying to say we are an ultra scarce. We have the ultra scarcity that Bitcoin doesn't have, and if you want ultra scarcity in an investment security, then you can buy it. I mean, it's not going to change the Bitcoin landscape.
But that's okay. Yeah. So this is the way that you can evaluate the first measure to figure out if something's a fraud or not is just take it at face value, right? Assume that they're going to do everything that they say they're going to do, and then see if it even makes sense. And if it doesn't even pass that test, then you don't have to dig in, right? Like I didn't do a code review of Rhodium before I decided that it was a fraud. I could just take that narrative, right, the pitch, and say it's absolute nonsense, because the unit of sort of the default unit that gets used when you're talking about a digital asset is completely irrelevant. If you want to talk about digital scarcity, Bitcoin only has 21 mega Bitcoins. They're never going to be more than 21 mega Bitcoins. So if you want scarcity, go buy 1 mega Bitcoin, and no more than 20 other people will ever have that. When you're buying something like a digital asset, what matters is the percent of the total supply, not some arbitrary unit, right? We've been debating whether we should do millibitcoins or bits or Satoshis or whatever. None of that matters. When you go and you spend $1,000 to buy Bitcoin, what you should be excited about is the fact that you have bought a percentage of something that is very, very scarce, right? And such a high percentage that very few people will ever own what you could buy right now for $1,000 of Bitcoin, because there's so many people on the planet and so little of the 21 million Bitcoin. Rhodium, they're just changing that one thing. Like that is obviously a fraud. Like there's no way that those guys sat down and thought, well, if we just change the name of it, right? Instead of having 1 million Satoshis per coin, we have 10 million Satoshis per coin. And they honestly thought we're going to change the world with this and provide real value. No freaking way. You can't be that smart and that dumb at the same time.
Well, I'm not going to argue with Bitcoin maximalism at all. I'm also going to say that some people have different intentions than others. Some people are just trying to create an attractive investment security that has nothing to do with Bitcoin. But again, that's up to you as the investor to decide what you want to do. But most of them out there are have so little use case at all that they are going to die. I think Be Private is the perfect example of that. Others will survive simply on quote investment merits, and others are out and out frauds where they're actually meant to be fraud. And, you know, again, if you go with Bitcoin maximalism as an investor, you're going to be just fine. Now, finally, I want to mention an utterly inane poll conducted by a group called Finders, in which they concluded, based on a tiny sample size of 2,000 people, that 8% of the US population has purchased cryptocurrency. And I guess they would assume that the Western world is somewhat in that same ballpark. From my perspective, this is ridiculous. As based on my experience, I'd put the number far closer to 1% than 8%. Better yet, I'd bet most of the people that once owned it no longer do, and that the vast majority of past and present owners have never even heard of offline hardware wallets, let alone used them. JW, do you believe cryptocurrency adoption in the Western world is closer to 1% or 8%? And in your view, is US crypto adoption significantly ahead of or behind the rest of the Western world?
I don't think there's any way it could be near 8%. If you just do the math and assume somebody bought, $1,000 of Bitcoin per person, it's not possible that 8% of the world's population already has this thing. It's very, very early. I think I would be surprised if 8% of the people in the United States even know somebody that owns Bitcoin. But yeah,
exactly. And they are talking about the United States. They're saying 28 million people have purchased crypto. Okay, that they don't own it now. Of course, most of them sold it in the last 2 months, or they sold it at the bottom when Mt. Gox crashed. But again, we're talking about 26 million people having bought Bitcoin. Not a chance.
Yeah, I mean, that's what is it, 8% of the population, but how much of the population is under 14 years old, right? A pretty big percentage. And how much of the population is above 50? Quite a bit. So I doubt that, we're looking at 25% of middle-aged folks have purchased Bitcoin. But yeah, I think the incredible thing is that so many people know about it. They've heard about it. It blows my mind that Trump is saying that, that you're not allowed as a US citizen to buy the Petro. Petro is so stupid. I can't believe it even exists in the first place, but it is a digital asset. And just the fact that that's such a major part of the dialogue now is incredible.
Yeah, I wasn't going to mention it, but the whole thing with the Trump, I actually wrote an article right after that said the dumbest reason for Bitcoin decline in history, because again, what Trump was saying was, I want to sanction Venezuela because Venezuela is trying to get around the ban on bolivars. He couldn't care less about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. He is trying to sanction Venezuela. So all of a sudden everyone sells Bitcoin. Right. That's like, this is some attack on cryptocurrency. That was easily the silliest thing I've ever seen. So anyway, with that, we're going to conclude today's podcast because we're over an hour now, but not before reading an inspirational tweet from one of the world's top Bitcoiners, Simon Dixon, of the truth of where we currently are and where we're going, i.e., Bitcoin has never been stronger. In 2017, we learned how to scale, handle hard forks, improve privacy, innovate off-chain, and become world reserve currency for all cryptocurrencies. In 2018, we implement what we learned. In 2019, all assets are traded against BTC. And in 2020, we have. Thanks again to JW Weatherman, one of the Bitcoin community's top thought leaders and defenders, for an awesome discourse on why everything Simon says is dead on. Please follow him at Twitter at @WeathermanIam and at jwweatherman.com and btcthreats.com. As for me, please try a free 7-day trial membership at cryptogoldcentral.com or contact me about cryptocurrency consultations at ahoffman@cryptogoldcentral.com. Thanks very much and have a great crypto day.